the birth of an invisible power in the restless aftermath of World War II. A silent race began deep inside Washington as the world struggled to rebuild itself from ashes that still felt warm. Nations were repositioning, borders were shaking, and a new kind of battle was emerging, one that could not be fought with tanks or armies. It was a battle of secrets, whispers, coded messages, and invisible footprints. Within this shifting global landscape, the United States recognized a truth that felt colder than any battlefield winter. Victory in the new age would belong to the nation that mastered information before others even sensed its presence. In dimly lit war rooms and temporary steel offices filled with cigarette smoke, a new idea took shape. An institution unlike any before it, built not on public glory, but on strategic silence. This institution would become the guardian of shadows, the architect of unseen operations, and ultimately the backbone of modern intelligence. The birth of this invisible power was not explosive or loud. It grew slowly, quietly, almost like a whisper carried through long corridors where men in dark suits walked with urgency and caution. President Truman had seen enough chaos during the war to know that peace was fragile and the world unpredictable. He authorized the creation of a central body capable of analyzing foreign threats before they reached American shores. This decision planted the seed for what would one day control some of the most complex operations the world had ever witnessed. In those early days, the new agency struggled to define itself. Files came from different military departments, intelligence was scattered, and no one truly understood how to combine it all into a single, powerful mechanism. Yet the officers who joined during the agency's infancy carried an unwavering belief in the mission. They were driven not by recognition, but by the quiet pride of knowing that the safety of millions depended on secrets they would guard with their lives. As the Cold War began tightening its grip on the world, the urgency grew stronger. Soviet influence was rising across continents, and American leaders realized that traditional diplomacy could not match the pace of covert expansion. Something more agile, more strategic, and more invisible was needed. This realization pushed the young agency into a new phase of evolution. It began building silent channels in Europe, forming trusted networks in Asia, and collecting fragments of information that stitched together stories no newspaper would ever publish. In the heart of Washington, a small team worked day and night, studying intercepted communications, tracking movements of political figures, and identifying hidden threats. They were mapping the unseen battlefield of the future. Their efforts shaped policies, redirected strategies, and convinced the government that intelligence was not merely supportive, but absolutely essential. Slowly, a framework emerged, one that would become the foundation of a global intelligence empire. The agency learned from early mistakes, refined its methods, and adopted new technologies. Analysts built new systems for processing information at speeds never seen before. Field officers trained in unconventional tactics, mastering the art of blending into cultures, languages, and environments without leaving a trace. Each small victory, each successful prediction, added another layer to this growing invisible power. What began as a fragile experiment was turning into a force capable of influencing global events without ever stepping into the spotlight. By the late 1940s, one truth became undeniable. The world had entered an era where intelligence shaped outcomes more than armies. This young agency, still evolving, still unpolished, began to realize its own potential. The officers felt it in their late nights analyzing coded telegrams. The analysts sensed it in the patterns emerging from scattered data. Leaders recognized it in the growing dependence on their insights. A silent transformation was underway. This rising force was no longer just an American necessity. It was becoming a global phenomenon shaping modern geopolitics. In the shadows of towering federal buildings, deep inside classified archives, and across distant foreign cities, operations quietly expanded. Global networks were forming like invisible threads connecting continents, guided by minds that could predict threats before they surfaced. The world was changing, not with explosions or declarations, but with invisible decisions made inside rooms no camera would ever see. The agency had matured into something stronger, something sharper, something capable of influencing history without leaving its fingerprints in public view. And as the decade closed, one thing became clear to every officer who walked those hidden hallways. Reviewing intelligence reports lit by dim desk lamps, the foundation had been laid, the framework built, and the identity of this institution had finally solidified. Its influence was no longer a flicker, but a force shaping the destiny of nations. The invisible power had been born, its presence quiet yet undeniable, its reach growing like a shadow stretching across the world under a dim rising dawn. The invisible power had been born. Yet birth was only the entry point into a world that demanded structure, purpose, and a new kind of discipline. The men and women who now stepped into the early headquarters of the agency understood that raw potential meant nothing without a framework strong enough to guide it. The United States stood on the edge of a new geopolitical chessboard, where each move had consequences that rippled across continents. The Cold War was tightening its grip, casting long shadows over Europe and Asia. And American leaders knew that only a sophisticated intelligence network could navigate this rising uncertainty. Inside the agency's growing halls, the early architects of modern intelligence began shaping blueprints unlike anything seen before. These were not architectural drawings made of steel and concrete, but maps of human networks, communication flows, enemy capabilities, and silent strategies designed to operate beneath global awareness. Every new room, every desk, every stack of classified reports added weight to a system evolving at remarkable speed. As global tensions increased, the agency realized it could no longer rely on scattered data or fragmented methods inherited from wartime intelligence. A new system was needed, one that fused analysis, field operations, technology, and predictive capability into a unified force. Senior officers drafted protocols for information flow, turning raw intelligence into structured reports that could influence national security decisions. In dimly lit office spaces, teams worked tirelessly to categorize threats, identify patterns, and recognize signals hidden beneath diplomatic gestures and public speeches. The blueprint of modern intelligence required more than data. It required foresight. Analysts began crafting new methodologies that studied not only what adversaries were doing, but what they might do next. This predictive thinking transformed the agency into a forward-looking machine rather than a reactive institution. It learned to see crises before they unfolded, to anticipate conflicts before the first shot, and to map political intentions before policies were announced. Meanwhile, field officers around the world were becoming pillars of this expanding architecture. Their training grew more rigorous and specialized. They were taught to navigate different cultures, decode subtle behaviors, and blend seamlessly into environments where one wrong step could compromise entire operations. These field officers were the silent extensions of the agency's reach, their actions forming invisible bridges between Washington's analysis rooms and the realities unfolding thousands of miles away. The blueprint expanded further with the rise of technology. Engineers and scientists collaborated with intelligence leaders to develop systems that could intercept communications, track signals, and process vast amounts of data. Machines began handling workloads that would have taken teams of humans weeks to finish. For the first time, intelligence was becoming a fusion of human insight and mechanical precision. Within the agency's headquarters, large rooms lined with machines hummed with constant activity. Streams of encrypted messages poured in from across the world. Analysts filtered, decoded, and interpreted each fragment, transforming it into actionable intelligence. The agency was becoming the silent nerve center of global information. Diplomats, military leaders, and policymakers increasingly relied on its assessments. Behind polished wooden doors, decisions that shaped global strategy were now being made based on the insights generated in those hidden rooms. As the blueprint solidified, so did the agency's identity. It was no longer a young organization searching for purpose. It was becoming a structured intelligence empire capable of influencing events before they appeared in the world's headlines. The United States now possessed a system that watched the world from angles no other nation could match. Networks extended across oceans, embedding themselves into the political, social, and technological fabrics of other countries. And yet, despite its growing power, the agency remained invisible to the public eye. Its successes were celebrated only in silence, and its failures buried in classified archives. Officers moved through their days understanding that their victories would never be recognized publicly. But their mistakes could change the course of history. The blueprint of modern intelligence had achieved what many thought impossible. It created a global structure capable of gathering insights from countless corners of the world and converting them into decisive action. The agency had become the unseen architect of America's foreign strategy, the silent shield protecting the nation from threats most citizens never knew existed. Still, the blueprint was only the beginning. The system was in place, the networks established, and the tools sharpened. Now came the next phase, one that required courage, secrecy, and a mastery of covert operations. As officers prepared to step deeper into the shadows, they understood the magnitude of the world they were building. They were not just shaping an agency, they were defining the future of global intelligence. The blueprint of modern intelligence had been set. Yet a blueprint alone could not defend a nation standing at the crossroads of a rapidly shifting world. What came next was the creation of a covert architecture so intricate, so deeply woven into global landscapes, that even those living within its reach would never realize they were standing in the middle of it. The agency had moved beyond theory. Now it needed a hidden framework capable of operating in silence, adapting instantly and influencing events without ever being seen. Inside the headquarters, senior officers gathered around long tables covered with classified folders, maps marked with coded symbols, and intercepted communications from distant capitals. They understood that modern threats did not announce themselves. They hid in political uncertainty, in sudden ideological movements, in secret negotiations behind closed embassy walls. To confront these unseen dangers, the agency had to evolve into something larger than a centralized institution. It required a global network of field officers, analysts, informants, and silent allies. Each one had to become a living thread in an expanding web of intelligence. The rise of covert architecture began with the restructuring of field operations. Officers were selected for their ability to disappear in plain sight, to decode subtle patterns in human behavior, and to handle the pressure of missions where a single misstep could compromise years of preparation. Their training grew more specialized. They learned to move through unfamiliar cultures as if they belonged there, gathering information not with force but through observation, trust, and the delicate art of blending in. Under this new system, safe houses emerged in cities across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. They appeared ordinary from the outside, apartments above cafes, basements beneath old bookstores, rooms tucked behind weathered courtyards. Inside, however, they served as stations where field officers relayed sensitive intelligence, coordinated mission logistics, or found temporary refuge between high-risk encounters. These safe houses became silent pillars of the agency's expanding architecture, holding together a world of operations invisible to the public eye. At the same time, new communication channels were developed to enable rapid contact between field teams and headquarters. Codebooks were replaced with encrypted devices capable of transmitting messages across continents within seconds. Analysts back home could now respond to immediate developments in real time, guiding officers through complex environments without ever revealing their presence. It was a system built not on force, but on precision. The agency also established covert partnerships with select individuals in foreign governments, research institutions, and strategic industries. Some were willing allies seeking protection. Others provided insights in exchange for discreet support. Together, these connections formed a network of silent collaborators whose knowledge extended far beyond the reach of official diplomacy. These alliances allowed the agency to influence global events without appearing at the forefront, directing outcomes quietly from behind the curtain. But covert architecture was not merely a network of people, it was a way of thinking. The agency began constructing psychological profiles of world leaders, studying their motivations, fears, and relationships to predict how they might respond during crises. Analysts mapped ideological movements with the same precision as military planners charting troop positions. They tracked the rise of new technologies, understanding how innovations in communication or computing could reshape entire regions. This emerging architecture transformed the agency from a collector of information to a designer of strategy. It learned to anticipate political shifts, to intervene before conflicts erupted, and to guide allies toward stability without ever claiming credit. Operations grew more elaborate. Some missions involved supporting diplomatic negotiations from the shadows. Others required discreetly shaping the flow of information within volatile regions. In rare cases, officers intervened directly to remove threats that could destabilize global balance. Yet with every expansion came risk. The deeper the agency embedded itself into foreign landscapes, the more invisible it needed to remain. Officers had to adapt constantly, discarding identities, tracing new routes, and navigating unfamiliar terrains. Every move was calculated. Every decision carried weight. One mistake could unravel an entire network. Inside headquarters, a new generation of officers studied the art of covert influence. They learned how to observe without being noticed, how to guide events without leaving fingerprints, and how to predict outcomes without ever stepping into the public eye. Their work blended psychology, geopolitics, technology, and human intuition into a single discipline, the science of invisible strategy. The rise of covert architecture also demanded technological innovation. Engineers collaborated with intelligence specialists to develop devices small enough to hide in everyday objects, yet powerful enough to capture critical data. Portable transmitters were disguised inside pens, watches, and even matchboxes. Listening devices were thin enough to slip behind wallpaper or embed within furniture. Drones, still experimental at the time, were studied as future tools that could observe without risking human lives. In Washington, the leadership recognized that covert architecture was giving the agency a new form of power: influence without visibility, control without recognition. This power was both an asset and a burden. It required caution, discipline, and constant refinement. But it also provided the United States with a strategic advantage unmatched by any other nation. By the end of this transformative period, the agency had become more than an intelligence organization. It was a global presence, operating through silent channels, shaping decisions, anticipating threats, and stabilizing regions without stepping into the spotlight. Every safehouse, every coded message, every carefully crafted report contributed to a structure so vast that few outside the intelligence world could comprehend its scope. The rise of covert architecture marked the moment the agency learned to operate not as a responder, but as a curator of global balance. What began as scattered efforts had now evolved into an intricate system capable of watching the world from every angle and acting decisively when necessary. And as global tensions continued to rise, the agency prepared to enter an era where covert influence would become the defining weapon of modern intelligence. The shadow architecture had taken form. But even a powerful architecture meant nothing without reach. To protect national interests in a world where borders mattered less each year, the agency needed to operate across continents with seamless precision. It had to stand in places where others could not, see what others overlooked, and move long before events reached the public eye. The next step in its evolution was to build a global shadow network that could observe, respond, and influence without revealing the invisible hands guiding every thread. In the years that followed, the agency expanded far beyond the constraints of traditional intelligence work. While official diplomats negotiated treaties in bright government halls, unseen operatives navigated the back rooms of markets, cafes, and diplomatic receptions. They slipped into bustling streets of cities like London, Paris, Tokyo, Cairo, and Buenos Aires, becoming part of the everyday noise. Taxi drivers, antique dealers, university professors, translators, sailors. Others contributed unknowingly, passing along fragments of information that analysts would later assemble into a coherent picture. A brief conversation overheard in a crowded bar, a shift in tone from a foreign official, an unusual shipment in a port warehouse, a sudden change in a remote region's political climate. Every detail mattered. Every fragment helped draw the silhouette of unseen threats and emerging opportunities. The agency built this network not through domination, but through presence. Officers lived quietly among local populations, adopting daily routines that made them indistinguishable from ordinary citizens. Their apartments were modest, their appearances unremarkable, their movements carefully mapped to avoid patterns. They sent encrypted messages from payphones, airports, or dusty internet cafes before fading back into the night. To strengthen these operations, the agency established regional hubs disguised as cultural institutes, research centers, or logistical offices. Behind their ordinary facades, trained analysts monitored global communications, tracked migrating threats, and coordinated missions unfolding thousands of miles away. From these hubs, mobile teams could be dispatched into neighboring countries in response to sudden developments, arriving quietly and leaving without leaving a trace of their presence. Meanwhile, the headquarters back home grew into a nerve center of global intelligence. A constant stream of encrypted reports flowed in from every corner of the world, filling vast rooms where analysts worked around the clock. Screens glowed with satellite images, intercepted transmissions, financial anomalies, and shifting political patterns. The goal was not simply to gather information, but to understand the currents beneath the surface, the subtle movements that signaled what was coming. To achieve this, the agency began studying global networks with scientific precision. They mapped trade routes, migration paths, technological developments, and emerging political groups. They charted how information spread across media platforms, how economic shifts affected alliances, and how the smallest regional conflict could ripple across continents. These insights allowed the agency to predict crises long before they reached the global stage. In certain regions, the shadow network became so refined that officers could influence events without ever stepping into the public sphere. A whispered warning passed to the right official at the right time could halt a dangerous negotiation. A discreet transfer of information could prevent an emerging conflict. A subtle encouragement to a reformist movement could stabilize a fragile region. The agency began shaping outcomes not through force, but through suggestion, quiet partnership, and timely intervention. Still, with growing reach came growing complexity. Every new link in the network required careful supervision. Every informant needed protection. Every relationship carried risk. To manage these layers, the agency created specialized units trained to coordinate between field teams and analysts, ensuring that information flowed smoothly without exposing sources. These units became the backbone of global coordination, allowing local operations to function independently while remaining part of a larger design. Technology also became crucial. Satellites scanned the globe in real time, capturing movements that once demanded days of fieldwork. Signals intelligence units intercepted communications hidden within the noise of international networks. Secure digital channels allowed officers to transmit high-value intelligence without physical contact. The more the world advanced, the more tools the agency gained to expand its silent influence. Despite these advances, the human element remained irreplaceable. Officers with local understanding, cultural awareness, and personal intuition could see what machines could not. A brief hesitation in someone's voice, a shift in eye contact, a sudden change in routine. These subtle signs often revealed more than any intercepted document. The agency valued these human instincts, shaping its operations around their strengths. By now, the global shadow network had become a living organism. It breathed through conversations whispered over coffee, coded messages tucked into routine emails, signals embedded in harmless-looking documents, and meetings staged in quiet corners of distant cities. Its influence extended into political circles, economic spheres, academic environments, and diplomatic halls. The world above continued with its usual rhythm, unaware of the silent structure guiding it from below. But the agency understood that power without restraint was dangerous. To maintain balance, internal oversight groups monitored sensitive operations, ensuring that missions remained aligned with strategic goals rather than personal interpretations. This self-discipline enabled the agency to operate broadly without losing control, keeping its network stable even as new global tensions emerged. By the end of this era, the agency had secured an invisible presence across continents. It could see crises forming before the world noticed them. It could intervene quietly, preventing instability through subtle guidance. And when silent influence failed, it had teams prepared to act quickly and cleanly, leaving no trace of their involvement. The global shadow network became the agency's most powerful creation, an unseen web stretching across borders and oceans, maintaining balance in a world where threats were no longer defined by armies or frontiers, but by decisions made in dark rooms. It was a network built on patience, precision, and the art of remaining unnoticed. Through this vast and silent system, the agency positioned itself not only as a collector of information, but as a guardian of global stability. It's prepared to adapt as the world entered an even more unpredictable era. The invisible network now spanned the Earth. But building it had not been an act of chance. It had been crafted piece by piece, like a silent cathedral rising through decades of shifting. Geopolitics engineered by minds who understood that the greatest strength of an intelligence agency was not its firepower, but its ability to see what others missed. As the CIA moved deeper into the late 20th century, its ambitions grew in sync with an increasingly interconnected world, where borders mattered less and information became the new currency of power. The architects inside the agency realized that they were no longer just collecting data. They were shaping the environment in which global decisions were made. From the quiet corridors of Langley, new strategies emerged that focused on building influence without ever revealing the hand behind it. Networks of informants expanded from major world capitals into remote towns, deserts, jungles, and islands. Satellites began to orbit silently overhead, acting as tireless guardians that captured movement, whispers, and patterns invisible to ordinary eyes. Surveillance evolved from old-school wiretaps to sophisticated interception systems capable of detecting signals that traveled across oceans through cables, thinner than a strand of hair. Every corner of the globe became a potential source of insight. And every insight became a piece of a puzzle only the agency had the full view of. Yet the network was not only physical or technological, it was also human. The agency invested heavily in understanding cultures, languages, and regional nuances, recognizing that the smallest gesture or phrase could reveal more than a stack of classified documents. Operatives trained to blend seamlessly into foreign societies learned to notice the unspoken rules of each environment. This allowed the CIA to predict movements of adversaries not through confrontation, but through subtle analysis, anticipating threats long before they took shape. These operatives became shadows among shadows, trusted by no one yet aware of everything around them. Inside the agency's hidden war rooms, analysts worked around the clock, turning fragments of intercepted calls, satellite images, and field reports into cohesive intelligence that guided global strategies. They learned to spot irregularities in shipping routes, decode faint patterns in financial transactions, and interpret shifts in political sentiment long before they became public. The rise of computers transformed the agency's capabilities even further, allowing them to store and analyze mountains of data faster than any human could. Algorithms quietly evolved behind the scenes, detecting risks that traditional methods would have missed entirely. With each passing year, the CIA pushed deeper into the digital frontier. Cybersurveillance became the new battleground, not fought with weapons, but with lines of code. The agency learned to breach encrypted channels, map hidden communication webs, and uncover digital footprints left unintentionally by those who believed they were invisible. Intelligence gathering shifted from chasing individuals to monitoring entire systems, recognizing that global events often emerged from hidden patterns rather than isolated actions. But even as technology advanced, the agency never abandoned the importance of old-fashioned human instinct. A sharp pair of eyes in a crowded marketplace, a brief conversation in a dimly lit cafe, or a seemingly harmless detail noticed during a diplomatic reception could still shape major decisions. The network relied on harmony between digital precision and human intuition. Each supported the other, creating a system that operated like a vast organism, constantly adapting to survive in a world where alliances shifted overnight and threats evolved in silence. Shadow stations, disguised as cultural centers, business offices, and research facilities, became the forward posts of this global web. They gathered local insights, monitored regional dynamics, and quietly influenced unfolding events without drawing attention. These outposts acted as the agency's ears and eyes on the ground, ensuring no major development happened without reaching Langley's awareness. Their presence often changed outcomes long before conflict ever had a chance to ignite. Back home, specialists trained the next generation of intelligence officers, passing down lessons earned through decades of silent struggle. They emphasized discipline, patience, adaptability, and the art of remaining unseen. New recruits learned that intelligence work was not about glory or recognition, but about safeguarding balance in a world where chaos could emerge from the slightest miscalculation. They learned to think like strategists, predict like analysts, and operate like ghosts. As the 21st century approached, the CIA's shadow network reached a new level of sophistication. Information moved instantly. Crises unfolded in real time, and adversaries became more elusive. The agency adapted by strengthening partnerships with allied nations, building quiet understandings that allowed intelligence to flow across continents without public acknowledgement. These partnerships formed a global shield, a shared effort to preserve stability in an era defined by rapid change. From silent satellites drifting above the clouds to agents embedded in bustling streets, from encrypted networks pulsing beneath the ocean to analysts decoding patterns in dimly lit rooms, the architecture of modern intelligence had reached its peak of complexity. The CIA's global shadow network became the backbone of decision-making, giving leaders the insight they needed to navigate storms before they formed. Through this far-reaching system, the agency solidified its role as a guardian of global equilibrium, prepared to face the rising unpredictability of an evolving world. And as the invisible web tightened, it became clear that its true strength lay not in dominance, but in anticipation, in understanding the unseen currents shaping global events long before they surfaced. A global force now operated in silence, guiding the world from the shadows. A global force now operated in silence, guiding the world from the shadows. And yet, this silent empire was still not at its final form. As the 20th century neared its end, the CIA recognized that survival in the new age meant reinvention. The old methods, the traditional networks, and the familiar rhythms of espionage were no longer enough. The world had transformed into a living web of information, technology, and interconnected systems, and the agency had to evolve with it. The transformation into a modern powerhouse required tearing down outdated frameworks, rebuilding entire divisions, and designing strategies that could function in a reality where power did not belong to armies or governments, but to those who controlled the flow of data. Inside Langley, this transformation began with a shift in mindset. Decision-makers understood that modern threats were unpredictable, often invisible, and capable of spreading faster than any conventional response could handle. Terror networks, rogue hackers, financial manipulators, private intelligence groups, and decentralized extremist cells emerged across the world, using the digital revolution as their battlefield. In this landscape, the CIA's greatest strength had to become adaptability, the ability to anticipate the next challenge before it revealed itself. This required merging technology with human expertise in ways no intelligence structure had attempted before. The agency invested heavily in advanced data analytics, constructing secure underground facilities filled with servers, quantum processors, and encrypted communication grids that allowed the CIA to process global information in real time. The analysts, who once worked through piles of classified documents, now navigated vast digital oceans of intel, sorting through billions of signals, messages, and patterns. Algorithms evolved into partners capable of detecting emerging threats, locating hidden communication routes, and identifying subtle anomalies across continents. These systems silently watched the world unfold, providing warnings long before crises erupted. But technology alone would not be enough to safeguard global stability. Human intelligence remained the lifeblood of the agency, the essential component that could sense intentions, emotions, and motivations beyond the reach of machines. The CIA created new training programs to prepare operatives for an age where blending into society required cultural fluency, psychological insight, and the ability to navigate both digital and physical landscapes with confidence. Recruits learned to speak new languages, understand political atmospheres, detect misinformation, and use modern tools without compromising old instincts. They were trained to think like strategists, move like diplomats, and remain invisible like the shadows themselves. These operatives were deployed across the world, embedding themselves in major cities, small communities, coastal ports, remote highlands, bustling technology centers, and emerging conflict zones. They observed shifts in social dynamics, monitored regional tensions, and quietly influenced situations that threatened to destabilize entire regions. Their presence ensured that the agency's reach was continuous, allowing Langley to remain aware of global developments as they happened. The operatives became part of the silent architecture, holding together a delicate global balance. To further strengthen its presence, the CIA built strategic partnerships with allied intelligence agencies, sharing information in tightly controlled channels and coordinating covert responses to emerging threats. These alliances formed a network of trust and cooperation, working quietly behind international diplomacy. Together, they intercepted illicit arms, routes, dismantled cyber operations, monitored extremist recruitment movements, and tracked money trails hidden behind layers of global banking systems. The alliances became essential pillars supporting international stability, even though their efforts remained hidden from public knowledge. Inside the agency, transformation also meant restructuring leadership. A new generation of directors and senior strategists emerged, individuals who understood the nuances of both traditional espionage and modern warfare. They studied global markets, digital conflicts, artificial intelligence, and geopolitical shifts, ensuring their decisions reflected the complex interconnectedness of the world. They encouraged innovation and tested new methods, pushing the agency beyond its established boundaries. These leaders believed that intelligence work was not only about responding to events, but shaping the environment where events would unfold. The agency's technological expansion reached new heights with the development of advanced cyber units trained to infiltrate encrypted servers, track dark web communication clusters, and dismantle digital threats before they materialized. These teams operated in silence, leaving no trace of their presence while navigating secret networks accessible only to the most skilled manipulators of code. Their work prevented attacks, exposed hidden funding channels, and intercepted dangerous plans long before they reached execution. Cyber intelligence became one of the defining tools of the modern CIA, capable of reaching places physical operatives could not. The transformation also extended into space. Satellites grew more powerful, capable of capturing detailed imagery, detecting heat signatures, analyzing environmental changes, and monitoring remote territories where human presence was limited. These satellites formed a silent constellation above the Earth, providing persistent observation that allowed analysts to track movements across oceans, deserts, mountains, and dense cities. The agency gained the ability to monitor large-scale developments, respond to natural crises, and anticipate geopolitical shifts with unprecedented clarity. Yet amid all this advancement, the CIA understood that the true foundation of a modern powerhouse was not dominance, but balance. The ability to operate with precision, restraint, and awareness of global consequences. Intelligence work required careful decisions, calculated risks, and the understanding that every action carried ripple effects capable of altering global stability. The agency learned to evaluate threats not just for their immediate impact, but for the long-term consequences they could set in motion. This transformation also demanded stronger internal discipline. New protocols were introduced to ensure oversight, ethical boundaries, and accountability, reinforcing the idea that a modern intelligence agency must operate with stability and integrity. Teams were trained to manage sensitive operations with caution, understanding that missteps in a connected world could trigger international tensions. The agency's evolution was not about expanding unchecked power, but about adapting responsibly to the challenges of a rapidly changing world. By the early 21st century, the CIA had completed its metamorphosis. It had become a modern powerhouse capable of responding to global threats across physical, digital, and ideological domains. It could track movements across borders, infiltrate encrypted communication networks, decode financial routes, and understand the psychological motivations driving global actors. It became a force not defined by visibility, but by presence, guiding global stability from the shadows while modernizing its tools, strategies, and philosophies. And as the agency settled into its new form, a single truth became clear. The future of intelligence would not be built on secrecy alone, but on mastery of a world where information itself had become the most powerful weapon. The modern powerhouse stood ready for the future, armed with knowledge and invisible reach. The modern powerhouse stood ready for the future, armed with knowledge and invisible reach. And yet the universe of intelligence was still expanding into territories that no agency had fully mastered. The 21st century unleashed a world defined not by physical borders or military strength, but by data streams, shifting alliances, unpredictable ideologies, and rapidly evolving technologies. To survive this new era, the CIA needed more than tools, networks, and operatives. It needed vision, the ability to foresee the next transformation before it unfolded and adapt at a pace faster than the world itself was changing. Inside Langley, this realization reshaped the very identity of the agency. Senior strategists recognized that the next frontier of intelligence would not be fought on battlefields or in political chambers, but within invisible spaces, encrypted networks. Artificial minds, quantum channels, private digital markets, and autonomous systems operating beyond human control. The agency understood that the future would belong to whoever could understand these silent dimensions first. And so the CIA began preparing for an era where artificial intelligence, algorithmic warfare, biotechnological disruptions, and cyber autonomy would redefine threat landscapes. This preparation started with the creation of forward analysis units, divisions dedicated to predicting long-term shifts in global power structures. These teams studied emerging technologies, changing societal patterns, disruptive economic cycles, climate migrations, resource competitions, digital sovereignty movements, and the rise of decentralized organizations. Their mission was not simply to react to crises, but to map potential futures and understand how instability might emerge years before it became visible. These futuristic profiles helped guide the agency's strategies, shaping decisions that aligned with patterns only expert analysts could detect. Simultaneously, the CIA expanded its presence within the digital world. Quantum encryption, deep neural surveillance systems, behavioral prediction models, and advanced cyber penetration tools were developed in secrecy. These systems could scan, analyze, and predict digital movements across continents. Code became the new weapon, algorithms the new battlefield, and information the new territory of control. The agency invested in digital operatives, specialists capable of navigating hidden layers of the internet, infiltrating disguised communication networks, and decoding high-level encryption that shielded the world's most dangerous secrets. But the agency also understood that technology alone could not safeguard global stability. Human intelligence, with all its instinct, emotion, and unpredictability, remained at the core of future operations. The future operative had to be more than a spy. They had to be a thinker, a strategist, and a bridge between human understanding and machine logic. Training evolved to include psychological engineering, cultural immersion, advanced negotiation tactics, deep language integration, and the ability to blend seamlessly into any environment while maintaining an analytical perspective sharp enough to detect subtle shifts in behavior. The world's geopolitical climate became increasingly fluid during this evolution. Nations formed new alliances based on technological needs, economic dependencies, and shared threats that existed beyond traditional rivals. Small regional groups gained influence through digital power rather than military strength. Autonomous financial networks operated across borders, bypassing traditional regulations. Ideological movements spread globally through virtual platforms in ways no classical intelligence framework could counter without adaptation. Recognizing these shifts, the CIA restructured its global reach strategy, ensuring its operatives were positioned in locations that reflected new centers of influence rather than historical alliances alone. Partnerships with allied agencies also deepened. Intelligence sharing became more advanced, more secure, and more necessary. Working together, agencies could map global data flows, track clandestine financial movements, intercept cyber attacks, counter misinformation campaigns, and respond to crises before they erupted. These alliances formed an interconnected shield, protecting global stability through cooperation rather than domination. Quietly, this network ensured that threats emerging in one region were addressed by multiple nations acting as one silent system. Meanwhile, the agency explored emerging frontiers that once belonged to science fiction. Space-based intelligence expanded to include real-time orbital surveillance, energy detection grids, and advanced satellite systems capable of tracking global activity with extraordinary precision. Biotechnological intelligence units monitored genetic research, biological data chains, and lab-level experiments that could potentially shift global security landscapes. Environmental intelligence teams studied climate-driven migrations, resource scarcity patterns, and ecological disruptions that could spark geopolitical conflict. The agency's reach had extended into every dimension where future threats might emerge. As the world grew more complex, the CIA refined its philosophy. The agency began to embrace the idea that the future of intelligence required not only reacting to danger but preventing it. That prevention depended on understanding the earliest signals of instability. Economic tremors, social unrest, ideological discontent, digital anomalies, clandestine financial flows, and emerging power vacuums. Analysts became architects of stability, using intelligence not to dominate, but to maintain global equilibrium in a world constantly at risk of fragmentation. Inside CIA headquarters, leadership adjusted their strategies to align with these realities. Directors emphasized integrity, responsibility, and global awareness. They understood that every covert action could influence international trust, economic stability, and geopolitical outcomes. In this era, intelligence was not simply about eliminating threats, but about navigating the consequences of each decision with caution and foresight. The CIA became an institution defined not only by capability, but by discipline and a commitment to long-term global stability. The rise of artificial intelligence became the most transformative frontier of all. machines capable of analyzing global patterns, predicting threats, and executing complex simulations became essential tools in strategic planning. But the agency was careful to maintain human oversight. Knowing that the future demanded collaboration between human intuition and machine precision, operatives worked alongside autonomous systems, each compensating for the limitations of the other. Together, they created an intelligence environment unlike anything the world had seen. As global systems grew more interconnected, so did the threats. A single cyber breach could destabilize economies, disrupt utilities, and influence political dynamics. A digital rumor could trigger unrest across multiple nations. A coordinated misinformation campaign could reshape public perception. In this environment, the CIA's role expanded from traditional intelligence collection to managing global digital stability. The agency monitored communication networks, detected coordinated influence operations, and intervened quietly to prevent destabilization without drawing attention. And through all this evolution, one truth remained constant. The CIA existed not to be seen, but to be effective. Its achievements were measured by crises that never happened, threats that never materialized, and instability that never gained momentum. Its finest operations were those that remained unknown. Its greatest victories were those the world would never recognize. As the future unfolded, the CIA stood at the center of a silent battle to preserve balance in an age of volatility. It became a force that navigated shifting alliances, emerging technologies, evolving ideologies, and unpredictable challenges. Each new era demanded reinvention. Each reinvention demanded discipline, and each decision carried the weight of global consequence. The agency's future was not defined by a single mission, but by its ability to adapt, anticipate, and operate with precision in a world where power shifted silently. And so, the CIA continued forward, standing at the edge of tomorrow, prepared for whatever new frontier awaited humanity. The shadows of the future had only just begun to take shape.